Welcome to Piece of History.
All right, let's dive right into one of history's greatest vanishing acts. Today, we're going to be unearthing a civilization that built these absolutely incredible cities, traded all across the ancient world, and then, poof, just disappeared from memory for nearly 4,000 years. I mean, really think about that for a second. We're not just talking about a civilization that declined. We're talking about one that was so completely forgotten that for thousands of years, nobody even knew it was there. An entire world just lost to time. Well, it actually happened. This is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization, which you might also hear called the Harappan Civilization. And get this, it was one of the 3 earliest urban societies, right up there with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. It's a story that is just packed with incredible achievements and some really profound mysteries.
So to really wrap your head around just how ancient these people were, let's look at this timeline. Their story starts way back, around 7000 BCE, with the very first stirrings of farming. Then, for thousands of years, they grow, they build up trade networks. But the really key period, the one we're going to focus on, is what historians call the mature Harappan phase. That's from about 2600 to 1900 BCE. This was their golden age. This is when their amazing cities were at their absolute peak, right before a long, slow decline started to set in.
And you know, we're not talking about just a handful of little villages here. Archaeologists have found over 1,000 different settlements so far. I mean, think about that number, 1,000, all stretching across what is now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. This thing was absolutely massive, a huge, sprawling civilization. So, what was it that made them so special? Well, for starters, it was their cities. They weren't just big, they were brilliantly designed. You can even say the Harappans were, hands down, some of the most gifted urban planners in the entire ancient world. I mean, just look at this blueprint. It's wild, right? It almost looks like a plan for a modern city. Their major centers, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were built on this incredibly organized grid system. You've got streets crossing at perfect right angles. Now, a layout like that doesn't just happen by accident. It tells you there was a strong centralized government making big decisions for everybody, usually splitting the city into 2 parts, a raised public area called the Citadel, and then the lower town where most people live. And this genius for planning, it went all the way down to the individual homes. They used standardized, baked bricks, which was a huge deal back then, a major innovation. A lot of houses had their own private wells for fresh water, and get this, bathrooms. Bathrooms that were connected to a citywide drainage system with covered sewers running along the streets. Their focus on public health and sanitation was just centuries ahead of its time. Seriously, to put that into perspective, most European cities wouldn't have anything this sophisticated until the Romans came along, and in some places, not until the 1800s. Okay, so let's zoom in on that citadel we mentioned. This raised, fortified area, it wasn't just for keeping people out. It was home to the city's most important public buildings. Archaeologists have found these massive granaries for storing food and incredible public works like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. This tells us they were a society that really invested in big public infrastructure projects. Okay, so we've got these amazing, super well-organized cities. But what about the people who actually lived in them? You know, who were they? What was their economy like? What did they believe? Let's dig into what the evidence tells us about their daily lives. Well, their entire society was really built on a strong agricultural base. They were growing things like wheat and barley, and this is a big one. They were the very first people in the world to figure out how to cultivate cotton. Now, all that extra food wasn't just for eating. It was the engine that powered everything else. It allowed a huge chunk of the population to specialize, to become skilled artisans, making beautiful pottery, intricate beads, and even mastering metalworking. And all that amazing stuff, it fueled a really vibrant trade network. And we're not just talking about local trade either, no way. We found Indus Valley artifacts all the way over in Mesopotamia, that's modern-day Iraq. Through these busy ports like Lothal, they were shipping goods clear across the Arabian Sea. And here's what's so cool, what really shows you how sophisticated they were. They didn't just trade, they created a whole system for it. They developed this super precise system of standardized weights and measures. Why? To make sure every single deal was fair, no matter how far away you were. But, and this is a big but, when we try to figure out their culture, their religion, what they believed, we kind of hit a brick wall. Our best clues come from these thousands of tiny little stone seals. They're amazing. They're carved with animals, with figures that look like gods or people in yoga-like poses, and of course, with symbols from their written language. They give us these tantalizing little glimpses, but they are so frustratingly silent. And that right there, that is the absolute heart of the mystery. The Harappans had writing, they had a script, but to this day, nobody, not a single person, has been able to decipher it. Just imagine, all of their stories, their history, their myths, their prayers, everything is locked away behind a code that we just can't seem to crack. Which, of course, brings us right back to the biggest question of all. A civilization this huge, this organized, this advanced, how on earth does it just vanish? Well, there's no single easy answer. The truth is, most experts now think it was kind of a perfect storm of things happening over a really long time. So picture this. First, the climate starts to change, slowly but surely. The monsoon rains they depend on for their crops become unreliable. Then, imagine the rivers, the lifeblood of their cities, start to shift their course, leaving whole towns high and dry. And on top of all that, you might have new groups of people migrating into the area. You put all that together, and you've got a recipe for massive, irreversible change. So the really crucial thing to understand is that this wasn't some sudden, violent collapse. We don't see a lot of evidence for a massive war or a big invasion. Instead, it seems like people just gradually left. They drifted away from the big cities over hundreds of years, heading to smaller villages, until eventually the great centers were empty. It wasn't a bang, it was a long, slow fade to black. But even though they're silent, their legacy is still with us. Think about it. They gave the world its very first cultivated cotton. They came up with ideas for city planning and public sanitation that were literally thousands of years ahead of their time. They were true innovators who left a deep, even if it's a quiet, mark on our collective human story.
And that leaves us with this one last big thought. When you look at those mysterious symbols, you just have to wonder, right? What other secrets about our own human story are still in there? What knowledge, what stories, what completely different ways of seeing the world are still waiting to be found, locked away in a script that has held on to its secrets for 4,000 years?